up and sit down. Shut up and sit down.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Build, Paint, Play. I'm Dave.
And I'm Jake, and just a quick update. We finally got our first sponsor.
Yay!
Hooray! And there was much rejoicing. The Army Painter was nice enough to step up. We had some problems with our graphics, so they will be up by the end of the week. Yep. But they are our first actual sanctioned sponsor, so we're pretty psyched about that. Yep. And joining us today is Mike from Firelock Games. So say hi to the lovely people back home, Mike.
How you doing, lovely people back home? Nice to be here. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Awesome. Super cool to have you. Glad that we've got you on Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Yeah, I mean, what better day could there be?
I know. It's kind of crazy. It's been a while since I worked in an office that celebrated Talk Like a Pirate Day, so it's...
I didn't even know that was a thing. I mean, I'm not surprised, but I didn't know that there was an actual day, so...
Yep. And I brought my pirate Bible with all the important information in case we need to look anything up, and some actual pirate phrasing and terminology.
Awesome. Probably stuff like eat citrus and just a list of shanties.
Let me see. Yeah, it checks out.
Awesome. So, we'll jump in and we'll have a very in-depth chat with Mike this evening, but first off, we'll say hi to folks who are in the chat. So we've got Scott, we've got Josh, we have got Walkabout Games. It's Mike. It is Mike. We've got Jim and we've got Chris. Hello. Arr.
Yar. There we go.
It's starting. It started already. Fantastic. Excellent. So hobby stuff. What have we've been up to hobby-wise? I'm going to throw to Mike first. What have you been up to?
All right. That was confusing because in my screen, I'm on the other side.
Oh,
so
sorry.
I was like, is there another way? So the little bit of hobby time that I've had lately has been, so we have a game in development. Sorry, I put my hand right in front of the screen. We have a game in development called Port Royal, which is a warband skirmish, level up your guys and explore the ruined city of Port Royal. And I've been using our new plastic ranges. I've been trying out some of this new slap chop stuff. I got a handful of models here. I'll show you my terrible paint jobs. If I can find my camera, there we go. That's kind of okay. So these guys, I've been painting a few of these guys. It's just kind of customizing my my little warband of Spanish Corsairs.
Excellent.
As we've been testing the campaign system out, and so far they have lost every game but one. So Painted them. I feel like I painted them for nothing, but that's been the majority of my hobby time. I did a little bit of I did a little terrain stuff recently. I don't have any of it with me here, but I did a little terrain stuff for my BattleTech setup. That's kind of what when I play on what I've been playing lately on the off time.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, not a whole bunch of hobby progress to report for me other than that. But it's kept me entertained.
Kept you busy.
Did you pick up the new Gale Force 9 Hextech terrain?
Yes, actually, I got it at Gen Con.
It's awesome.
So,
like we just got the second wave in, which is like all the highways and intersections and like the steps, the rock steps. Like that stuff is so great. Like I have enough miniatures to paint. I don't need to be painting terrain. So I love that it's a great scale. Like some guy was like, "What if I don't play BattleTech?" And I was like, "You could use it for anything that's like between like 6 and 12 mil. So you could use it for like Titanicus or Aeronautica Imperialis if you want to like kind of spice things up. You could use it for drop zone commander. It works pretty much for all that stuff. But it's really really nice stuff.
Excellent.
Good deal. Yeah, it is. It is pretty nice. Very handy for sure.
Yeah, Chris. I forgot I just sent a bunch of it to Chris. It was Chris's birthday, so happy birthday to Chris Cumming.
Happy birthday, Chris.
But yeah, he just got a bunch of it. So
excellent. Scott says sponsors, corporate sellouts. Thing used to be for people, not corporations. It's still for the people. This allows us to do more for you people.
Right.
You people, us people, we the people. It does. So it should be good. We're hoping if we can pick up another sponsor or two, we'll be able to then also get a producer who will be able to take a lot of the wonderful techie button pushing stuff from me, away from me, so that I can just focus on things. And maybe we'll be able to get like I saw been seeing a Logitech camera swing arm thing that would be perfect for shining over the top of my wet palette. And
we can get crazy and do like a multi-camera setup. So Dave and I can do an episode where we're actually painting live, and we can do all kinds of stuff. So
that would be awesome. So that's the plan anyway. But Jake, what about you? What have you been doing hobby wise?
I mean, I brought them home with me to keep working on them, but I've still been slogging away trying to finish up that Iron Warriors tank list for Heresy. I've just been like, putting more weathering on them and doing all my water slide transfers and unit markings and stuff like that. I bought some weathering, not weathering, but like I guess it's weathering powder. I bought some like weathering like texture paints from AK. It's a kit of their like Abtilung kit. So it's like 4 colors. There's like a desert ochre and like a kind of a burnt yellow and like a mud color.
Okay.
And I've never used them before, so I've been watching like tutorials and stuff. And Chris said he would help me. I've never worked with weathering powders. I do lots of wear and tear with like dry brushing and like effects and stuff, but I was like, I've never tried these before. I'll try them out on the tanks. So,
Cool.
So they're coming along. And then on a non-miniature hobby, I got back on the ice on Friday and played ice hockey goalie for the first time in I had to double check with my wife. It's been about 15 years since I played.
Oh wow. Okay.
It was fun. I was super sore the next day, and but it was good. It was good to get back out there and get between the pipes and play some hockey. So I'll be doing it again this Friday. And the guys were like, "Oh, you want to come back next week?" And I was like, "I will come back until my back gives out or my knees give out." So. We'll see.
Fingers crossed that's a long way off.
Seriously.
Excellent. Well, I did zero exercise, a little bit of walking, but not no strenuous exercise. But I did a bunch of.
Oh, I chopped down a tree, like with an axe. Like I was like, I'm sure I'll use an axe.
Nice one, George.
Like actually chopped down a tree. I forgot about that
too. Awesome.
Is that an actual hobby? Is that something people do recreationally?
The hobby was my wife and I were like cleaning up our suburban yard. And there's a dead tree in the corner. And she's like, we should have somebody remove it. And I was like, I have an axe. I'm like, I've played a fighter before in D&D. How hard can this be?
I've seen those TikToks.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
I was like, honey, get this for TikTok.
Bam. That's terrible. I'm glad she didn't.
No, it was
really
fun. It actually wasn't bad. it's a whole bunch of muscles that you don't really think about. Like when I did it, I was like, oh, this is fine. And then later on, I was like, back feels weird. It was like, it's all like lower back.
Yeah.
From like pulling and like turning and stuff. And I was like, cause you're like, it's not a baseball swing. Like you're really like putting everything into it. It was weird. So, but it was fun. It was a good time.
Nice. Excellent. I've been building up more stuff for my Space Marines, doing a lot more assembly.
Tell them about your great Space Marine deal.
Oh, yeah. So I went over to my friend Thomas's place. I'm just before we do that, I'm noticing some feedback. Somebody's volume up too high.
Should be me. I'm only on headset.
I don't know. No, it's.
I can turn mine down a little bit. I don't think it's that loud, but
okay. Let's see if it's. I've done a bit of an adjustment in.
Is that better?
We're both adjusted, I think. Yeah, that's probably better.
Okay.
Cool. So yeah, I went over to my friend Thomas's place on Friday night and dropped off some terrain, and he'd pulled out all of his sort of spare Space Marine stuff, or Space Marine stuff that he's never going to get to, and I was like, "Yep, I'll take it all." And now my army has gone from 3,000 points to about 5,000 points. Well, at least once I assemble it all, whenever that happens.
The potential for up to 5,000.
The potential for up to 5,000, yeah. So I've been doing some building. I wanted to start getting my models painted. So that's my scheme.
Did you find like a transfer or something you're going to use?
No, I'm using a. So it's a sculpted piece. So it's 3D printed.
That's cool.
It's like a star with a. I think it's from the Marines Errant.
So
it's a star with a big sort of flare.
Their falling star.
Yeah, the falling star sort of thing, coming out behind it, and that's a 3D printed helmet as well. Look at that hockey goalie mask kind of look.
Nice. Yeah, I thought it was the Forge World. It looks almost like the Forge World Blood Angel helmets.
Yeah, it's very similar to that.
It's just missing the teardrop.
Yeah. And I also started painting on the Cities of Sigmar.
Nice.
So
nice.
Lower it a little bit, I think. Your head's getting chopped off.
Pardon? Oh, we lower it?
Maybe it's just on the... There you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So pretty happy with how they're turning out.
That guy is super ugly.
Cool.
That guy? I haven't finished painting him yet. How could you say that? You're crushing me.
It's the sculpt. It's not you.
Oh, okay, radio. Okay.
Remember, he's supposed to be kind of gross.
Well, yeah, they all are. So all good. But yeah, I've got the Marshal and 10 guys underway there. I'll probably have those finished by next week. And then I also painted up some pirates.
Nice.
From Blood and Plunder.
Those are awesome.
So this is
that's one of the best miniatures I've ever seen.
So this is Black Caesar. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
And if I remember correctly, if I remember my quick internet search, he sailed with Blackbeard.
Yeah, sort of, allegedly. He's kind of like the closest we come to any kind of fantasy thing, but here in South Florida, he's like a local legend.
Right.
So I just included him anyway.
Cool.
He probably didn't really exist as we know him, but whatever.
Okay.
The Biscayne National Park, which is our like coastal thing,
yep.
Like the reefs here off the coast of Miami, has like a plaque on one of the islands talking about him. So to me, that's official enough to count him as an actual historical person.
Right. Cool. How about Anne Bonny? Was she an actual?
She was very much a real person.
Okay.
Yep,
she's real. Actual pirate.
Yeah,
excellent.
Very cool.
And Calico Jack.
Yep, he is also real.
Yep.
Also real.
Excellent. So, yeah, lots of building and painting and that kind of thing. I think I showed this guy in the Facebook group So I'm going to hold him up to the camera again because I like holding models up to the camera.
That guy's rad.
So,
Cool.
with his huge shield made from the standard. Anyway, loads of painting activity. All been lots of fun, and yeah. So that's what I've been up to hobby-wise. I think when is it? Next Wednesday, we're playing our first game of the Silver Bayonet campaign. So I'm looking forward to that, which will be good. Been excited about that for a little while.
Very cool.
But yeah, so that's hobby stuff for me. So that's all of us. Excellent. And now we shall jump into the main the main event. Gar.
Sure. I think my favorite pirate terminology is probably avast.
Avast.
Do you know what it means? Most people don't know what it means.
It's kind of like hey, or like attention, or like what's up.
It just means stop.
Like
Avast means stop.
It means stop, basically, like cease. Yeah.
Mhm.
so it's like, then basically it would be like, stop what you're doing, listen to me.
Okay. All right.
Avast there would be like, hold on there, like stop it. You know, like that would be how that actually is used.
Cool.
That was a name that I flirted with using very, very, very early on in the development of Blood Plunder. Is just calling it Avast because I thought it sounds cool, right? But then I figured out what it meant, and I was like, oh, that's kind of a letdown. So
It's not quite as cool.
no. But now you can use it in in day-to-day life and confuse people, which is always fun.
Excellent.
Oh, there you go. So Josh says Avast is like belay. I always like belay.
Yeah.
They use a lot of that in Star Trek too. Belay that. It basically means like forget that or tie that off. Do this instead.
Yeah. Like if you were on a ship firing a bunch of guns and stuff, and you wanted to like cease fire, you'd yell Avast, Avast, stuff. That's how they would
do it.
That's how they would communicate that.
Excellent. So
one of my other favorites that I learned not somewhat recently, a couple years ago. So like I love the movie Master and Commander. Like that whole series is great, and that's basically like the first book and part of the second, essentially. So I was hoping they were going to do a series, and like obviously for whatever reason they decided not to. But one of my favorites is that there's a couple spots where Russell Crowe as Captain Jack says, "Prepare the larboard batteries." And a friend of mine's like, "Oh, he mispronounced starboard," and I was like, "Larboard is what they used to say for port," and then they realized that it's very similar to starboard. That's when they started changing it.
It took them a few hundred years to realize that, but they eventually figured it out.
It was more, they figured out like as they started doing more like military shipping, it was like if you were in the middle of a gun battle, it was really hard to be like, which side did he say? Because they sound very similar.
Yeah.
Everybody would be deaf. But so Mike, Blood and Plunder. I'm going to transition. We've got a wonderful Blood and Plunder image that we're pulling up on screen here, which is
cool.
Has the Blood and Plunder logo and the like a ship docked. But Blood and Plunder, how did it come about? What was what sort of drove you to start working on a pirate game, historical pirate game?
Well,
back in the day,
there was so I was playing a long time ago. I was playing a game called Legends of the High Seas. GW Historical put that out. You might be familiar with it.
Yep. Pretty
cool game. It's kind of like Middle Earth battle game mechanics with like sort of a wartime campaign built in. And it was super fun. But I had always been, since I was a little kid, really little, as far as I can remember, really into pirates and the whole thing. And living in South Florida, being around the ocean all the time, and just enjoying sailing and a bunch of other things that are just very much connected to it. It's always been a fascination. And I had never considered, I've been gaming for a long time, but pirate gaming just didn't, at the time, it didn't make sense to me. Like, you're going to have a giant, especially because all my gaming was 20 millimeter, with the exception of like Battletech. But, it didn't connect to me that you could have like a pirate skirmish game, and then 28 mil ships and stuff. I'm like, that's crazy. Who's gonna do that? Until these guys did it, I was like, and then I discovered that, and I got into it with some friends, and we ran some campaigns, and it was a lot of fun. And then when they pulled the plug on Warhammer Historicals, a lot of the guys I was playing with, just as often happens, when a game gets pulled, they just kind of lost interest and moved on to the next thing. So even though that's just a game, that's just a rulebook. There's no reason that you can't play it. But,
Yeah, keep playing for sure.
But for whatever reason, people just kind of. But anyway, when that was no longer an option within my local group, I just kind of I went on a trip to St. Augustine here, and I was just the first time I visited there, actually, which is, if you've never been to St. Augustine, it's really cool. It's like an old Spanish city.
It's the oldest city in North America.
That's correct. Yeah. Oldest, yeah. And then there's they got the fort. They've got the Pirate History Museum. They've got all kinds of cool stuff there. They've got 2 forts, actually. Technically 3 if you count Fort Mosé, although it's no longer standing, but the place where it was is still there. Anyway, so that trip just kind of like inspired me to get back into it, and I was like, I just got the desire to give it a shot to write my own game. And I had been playing so many games at that point that I was like, I feel like I've played enough games that I could kind of probably figure this out. And just started like messing around, putting it together. I had bought a deck of playing cards at one of the forts. I think it was at Fort Matanzas, which is the small one on the river. And I said, it'd be cool to implement this into the game, and that's kind of where the whole card drawn, the card activation mechanics that I came up with came from, just by the random purchase of that decks of cards. And I wanted to incorporate it in the game.
It's because you didn't buy a snow
just,
globe.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have a lot of snow globes in those places, but yeah, I kind of just messed around with it for a couple of years. It started out as a warband game, actually, and as I decided I wanted it to be like a really historical game. I was like, and then I got really interested in learning the real history of pirates and stuff, and that kind of moved me away from a lot of the more popular things that people know about, like a lot of these, like if you've watched Black Sails, for example. All like the famous pirate characters that are in that show. What I realized is that in that period, which is the early 18th century, those pirates are really well known, and because they're featured in this book called The General History of the Pirates, which is written in 1730. So it's pretty, close to when these people were active and alive. And this guy, the guy who wrote it must have known these people or known somebody who knew these people, but he obviously, it wasn't a good piece of history, but it's there are some true things in there, and it's a good guide. But he embellished a lot to sell books, because ultimately it's entertainment, right? You're selling the scandal of these people at the time. So he kind of blew them up for more than they were, because the reality is most of those famous pirates, even like the super notorious Blackbeard, is never known to actually have killed anybody, first of all. And second of all, the only real fight he ever got into, which is the last fight he got into, which is what our really nice starter set is built around, he lost it terribly. I mean, once they boarded, every single pirate was like slaughtered on deck, and not a single Navy seaman was injured in that or slain in that fight. So, they got their butts kicked pretty badly. And generally, that's what happened with these pirates. But when you hear phrases like the Pirates of the Caribbean, what people think those pirates, but what that really refers to is the buccaneers of the previous century, the middle to late 1700s. I mean, 1600s, 17th century. The people that were around in the time of like Henry Morgan, like he's like kind of the only really well-known pirate of that era, I think. Although some people know some others like Lolonais and a few others like that, but mostly pirate nerds are the ones that are going to know about these guys. But these guys were not. These guys were the opposite. These guys were like serious badasses. I mean, they formed gigantic armies of like thousands of pirates, and they would meet together. They'd have these they'd have their meeting spots, and like the word would go out like, hey, Admiral Henry Morgan is setting up an expedition, and people would come from all the haunts, from Port Royal and Tortuga and Petit Guave and places like that, and they'd all meet up, usually Isla Vache, which is an island just south of Cuba, and they'd all meet on this little island, and they'd put together the expedition, they'd vote on what they're going to do, and then they'd go out and they would raid Spanish cities. I mean, and this was like, they were outnumbered. Like sometimes as much as like 20-1 by the Spanish troops, and they were attacking. If you've ever seen a Vauban fortress, right, like a typical Spanish fortress anywhere in the Caribbean, or even the one in St. Augustine is like a joke compared to something. It's like a tiny little thing, right? But if you've ever seen one of these fortresses, it's amazing. Like just look up Moro Castle in Cuba, for example. Crazy stuff. They're enormous, and they would attack these things with no artillery. They would just rush the walls, throw grenades, throw ladders over the top, and just storm these things. And these guys were insane. The stuff they did to put it in modern terms, it would kind of be like if a bunch of street gangs got together and like in the United States and then went across the border and like raided Toronto and captured it and stole everything and then left. That would be like the modern equivalent of what these guys that's maybe a little much, but sure. Something along those lines really is not far-fetched from what they did. And it was different because it's more of a frontier environment. So but that's kind of in perspective for the time. That's pretty similar to what these guys would have done. So that's why we started the game. We've now moved on to like the 18th century with the stuff you just showed that you painted and things like that. And that's because it's still cool and it's still fun and we can play in that. We're not super strict history guys over here. Like, we want everything to be right and accurate, and we do a lot of research and focus to make sure it is. But if you want to, paint your guys all as ghosts and play with that, and we don't care. It's fine. It's a game. It's made to have. We make it for people to have fun and enjoy. So, I focused a lot when I went on a tangent there. I'm sorry. To go back to where I was. We ended up focusing. I ended up focusing more on the 17th century, and it grew from a warband game into like a unit-based game. So I felt like that was more appropriate because really, I realized there's having a crew of like 10, 15 pirates would have been like very rare. Like it happened, but that would be incredibly rare, and they wouldn't really do anything significant. It's more like robbing fishing boats and stuff like that. But even in Blood and Plunder, we're still focusing on the smaller end of the scale, as a lot of these buccaneering actions, like I said, would evolve. Like when Henry Morgan attacked Panama City, he I think he had like 2,000 buccaneers with him, if I remember right, off the top of my head.
Okay,
I could be remembering wrong, but it was a significant amount of people. And these were enormous battles for the time, and not so much for the time, but for the theater. Because in the New World, that's a massive army, right? And that would be a big battle. So I wanted to kind of capture something more in more of the grand scheme of it, and then to really have a good ship battle, you kind of need. With the cool ships like the frigates and the flutes and things like that, you kind of needed some larger crews to really handle them correctly and have a bunch of cannon and stuff.
Right.
So that kind of led me into that. And I think that answers your question for the most part. I'll leave some room here for you to ask more without going on and on too much.
No, absolutely fine.
Stop myself there.
Yep. So basically, so as we can tell, it's definitely an intense passion of yours, and you've I guess it's continued to grow and develop and move along as you've learned more, as you've researched more, and found things that you can focus the development on, I guess.
Yeah, and our plan after we released the initial game, which kind of covered a very little sliver of history, which is like, I think the initial game probably covered about 1660 to 1680.
Okay.
And then we broadened that with our next expansion to cover the fullness of the 17th century. And then from there, we really got deep, because what we decided, what I just researching this kind of led me down the rabbit hole into just other American, Caribbean, South American colonial conflicts as well. So we really, even though the marketing and all the sexiness of the game is all around the pirates, because that's that's what people like and know.
Yep. Really,
it's at its heart just a colonial battle skirmish game, because we cover all kinds of stuff from like from like the Scottish settling in the Darien region in Central America to King Philip's War in North America, and the French and the Dutch and the Portuguese fighting in South America, and all the Native American groups and all these different things that are happening at the same time. So it's pretty. I mean, the game has now now that we move into the 18th century, the game has well over 100 different factions you can play.
Wow.
And they're all pretty different and unique. So we go pretty deep into it, and the plan is to continue to just kind of move the timeline forward, and eventually go all the way up to about the War of 1812 kind of time space. And it starts at that point. It starts to move a little bit away from piracy, more into the privateering aspect, and more of the colonial battles, like the French and Indian War and the American Revolution and stuff like that as we go. So
right. Cool. On the screen at the moment, we've got a couple of the sort of pieces of line art. And you can tell with the wonderful hat. So I've got a cavalry guy and I have a captain, I think, on the screen. But yeah, I can tell by
I can't see it, unfortunately. So.
No, I can tell by the hats that it's in that sort of late 1600s sort of period.
Right. Yeah.
So, who were the main nations that were active in the Caribbean at that time? There's
So in the
Spanish.
There's several Native American groups. Yep. We cover the Kalinago, which at the time known as the Carib. They're kind of forced into like two small islands. I think it's St. Vincent and Dominica at the time, but still they're significant. There's of course the Spanish and the Spanish Main, right? The Main is really the mainland, but they've lost a lot of control of the Caribbean. They control the North Caribbean, but not so much the South Caribbean anymore. At this point, there's the French, there's the Dutch, there's the English. There's a bunch of minor groups rolling around in there. Like we have kind of like a peripheral, we call it peripheral nation that just kind of covers a bunch of like some Danish settlements in the Caribbean that are covered there, and then there's some like some German privateers that are like just wandering around. The Portuguese, who are kind of really go more into the more significant side of things, but it's just hard to research. So they get they're not out in their fullness yet. They're just kind of there as a peripheral thing, but they are there represented, and we do have some characters and things for them. And then there's, of course, within the Unaligned, there's the pirates, and there's Brethren of the Coast and things like that as well. Okay,
excellent. Just quickly going to jump to the chat. Scott Radham says, the most accurate pirate series I've seen is Our Flag Means Death. It's bang on.
Oh, yeah.
Jeff Smith's here. Evening, everyone. Camo Specs Online says, hey, he may have been the worst pirate you've ever heard of, but you have heard of him. So
that's right.
Wonderful line. Pirates of the Caribbean, excellent. And Dave Hummel is here. Hi, Dave. Welcome. Cool. So the next image I'm going to bring up here is a photo of basically a scenic shot. It's some natives across on a rope bridge across between two rocky outcrops with a ship in the background. You probably remember that one, but I think now if we talk a little bit about the game itself and the mechanics of the game. You said, so what's a sort of typical size force that we'd be looking at? Is in that sort of 30 model count? Yeah.
Yeah, like model count. Probably 25, 35.
Okay.
It's probably average. You can go with very elite forces and get as little as 15. Some of the less skilled forces, like the Spanish militias and stuff, you can go up to 50. For a standard points game, like between 150 and 200 points is pretty average.
Okay.
Depends on what you're playing. That goes down a little bit if you're playing with ships, because with ships you're going to pay to equip the ship and buy your ship and all that other stuff. And I should mention that the ships kind of are one thing. Probably the most unique thing about the game is the way ships are seamlessly integrated into the game.
Yep.
Where they're basically they follow all the same rules that you apply to buildings, except that they can move around on water. Right. So they're very easy to add in. It's a lot of people are intimidated by it. That's why we put 2 ships. That's why when we made a start, I wanted to make sure to have 2 ships in it, because I want people to not be intimidated and have some ships and be ready to jump in.
Right.
Because it really it's a seamless transition right into ships.
Yep. So I think that is a great thing there, because it I guess a lot of us as wargamers would be thinking, okay, there's going to be 2 separate. We're talking 2 separate games here. You're talking, one is a game of infantry fighting infantry on land, and the other one is maneuvering ships in a different fashion. So they almost exist as 2 separate games, but the way that you've pulled them together is really cool.
Yeah, thanks. Glad you think so. It's what's cool about it too is that it's when you're playing a ship game, mechanically nothing really changes. Like there's no real different. Like there's rules for the way the artillery works and interaction structures, but that works the same on land, right?
Yep.
And there's only a couple rules that you really need to know for ships, and that's just basically the different maneuvers you could do, but they're pretty simple, and it's just a small list. It's like I think it's like 3 things that you could do that are really that you're going to do consistently. So it's not difficult to remember. But what's interesting is that they play tactically very differently, right? So maneuvering your ship and managing your crew, it's an alternating activation, sort of, where you're activating units with your cards and you're kind of managing the hand you draw of cards is going to control how many actions you're going to get and your initiative. So you're going back and forth with these cards, and your ships are going to move multiple times each turn, so that you're actively maneuvering, you're choosing which units in your ship are activating to do what and when, and that gets to be really important.
Yep.
So there's some cards that give you more actions than other cards, and typically higher initiative cards give you less actions. So you can play a pass card, so you're going to go first, you're going to fire, you're going to move up on somebody, but you're limited to what you can do. So now you're not loading your guns as fast. Now you don't have as many options, right? Or if you're firing your musket, you're boarding, whatever, you're more limited in your ability to do things, but you're going first, which is significant. So the game has a lot of that balance. And on land, it's the same balance, so you're balancing those same things, but it's in different circumstances, so you end up with a completely different play experience with the complete same rule set, which is really fun and really cool, and it adds a lot of playability to the game.
Right. Excellent. I think the photo we've got on screen at the moment is of some troops on the wall of a fort, I guess, firing onto a ship out in the.
Right.
You love the reefs and the dead body in the water.
Yeah. Yep. But I guess over the years that Blood and Plunder has been around, that a lot of the mat companies have gone, hey, yeah, we should do a beach, and we should do like some.
Yeah, we picked up some water mats, like double-sided, but we picked up some water mats for Victory at Sea, which is the World War II. I don't know what scale it is, but like a battleship that's like this big. But it's, I mean, there's nothing on the map that's scale, so like you could use it for anything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, because you guys make Oak and Iron is the ship combat game.
Yeah, so that's more focused on squadrons and fleets and naval battle. I mean, again, that game kind of scales. You can play small kind of piracy, privateer sort of engagements. You can play bigger kind of naval engagements. But it does both. But that one's a 1/600, and that one is more of a. So the whole thing with that one was we wanted to make a really, really accessible game for people who, because we went weirdly with Blood and Plunder. It was a lot of people's, especially in our first Kickstarter. It was a lot of people's first war game, which surprised me. because it's intimidating to a lot of war gamers because they see the ships, they see the land combat, they don't know what to make of that because it's different, right?
Yep.
But we got a lot of people who had never played a war game before, and a lot of them were, once they got in, they realized that they got to build stuff and paint stuff and make terrain and everything. They were a little intimidated, right? So I realized that there's a lot of people who are interested in that kind of thing, and I feel like games like X-Wing and stuff like that did a really good job of getting people to play war games that would typically be intimidated by it. So the whole goal of Oak and Iron was a game. It's completely self-contained in the box. You even get a CMAT in the box, and everything you need is in there to play from start to finish. So you can buy that game as if it was a board game and just pull it out and play it occasionally and put it back away in its box, which is cool. That was kind of the goal, and we've done well with it in that regard. We sell it to a lot of board game players, the people who play board games traditionally and not war games, because you don't really have to glue the ships together. The mass kind of pop in and out, and you could paint them, but we made them. We made brown plastic for the hull, white plastic for the sails, so you don't need to paint them, and it doesn't look terrible, right? You can just kind of get the general look and feel of it and stuff. But that game is a game it's kind of a spin-off of Blood Plunder. It's like in the same world, right? So, but it was just I've wanted to play a game like that, and I've not really found one, especially one that covers the earlier. Like you get a lot of games that cover like Napoleonic Wars and stuff, which to me, as far as naval combat, unless you're talking about privateering actions, the Napoleonic Wars are like the most boring naval wars of all time, because. I mean, it's just like, oh, okay, I play the British, I win. I mean, it's just not that interesting. I don't know. Yeah. People love it, and I get it because the ships are gorgeous, the history behind it all. But as far as actual gaming on the table, it's just like not. You can't really do it right. I don't know. It's not that great. I mean, we still plan on expanding Open Irons that time frame, but I'm going to focus more on the American Revolution and the War of 1812 and places where it's a little more interesting.
Okay.
But do you do a lot of like? So when I was at GW, we did a lot of like tiered gaming. So like I think one of the episodes we talked about in our first season, I used to run the bunker that was in Boston, and our store was 3 floors. So in the upstairs, which only was 3 tables, we had a bunch of guys playing Battlefleet Gothic, and they had a set of walkie-talkies. And then on the second floor, which was like our main area, we had a big battle mat where people could like kind of keep track of everything. And then we also had a really small like it technically wasn't kill team. I think we were doing it almost like using Space Hulk rules, because one of the missions was you had to get in, board the space station, and then run that mission. And then in the basement, we had all of they were fighting across the sector, so we had all different tables set up. And the idea was that if the Battlefleet Gothic Imperial Fleet, let's say, gets near Planet A, they can radio to Planet A's table, and they can call in a Lance Strike. So, and I know that the reason I bring it up is I know that Warlord Games recently just put out their Combined Arms box game, which lets you play basically Blood Red Skies, which is the air combat game. It lets you play Victory at Sea, which is the naval combat game that has carriers in it, so you can launch fighters and then you play Blood Red Skies, and then they have Bolt Action, which is the 28mm World War II game, and Combined Arms lets you play it all together across the game. Is there a way to play like Oak and Iron and be like, oh, you got to breach the line and get your ship to the fort, and then you get there, and then you're like, cool, now we drop into,
Blood and Plunder,
a different format.
Yeah.
Designed to work like that, or could you do that?
Yeah, so not right now. You could pretty easily. It wouldn't take much to do it. It was part of our original plan with Oak and Iron, and I was developing it, and I got pretty far along, and then 2020 happened and kind of derailed everything I was doing and totally shifted all the things I was working on as we went into kind of survival mode for a little bit, and then because Oak and Iron actually had the great misfortune of releasing in April of 2020 to a very disastrous situation. So not only did it release in that time period, but the people who were handling it completely messed it up. And they just the company that was fulfilling, we haven't really used the fulfillment companies to do a whole project since, because we've just had really bad luck with it. And it was just a big giant mess. So between everything going on in 2020 and that, it just kind of derailed everything I was doing. And we're a very small company. It's basically 5 of us, doing everything from shipping and design and sculpting and design, game design and everything else. So it was and then at the same time, of course, just to add to our difficulty, one of our people was diagnosed with lymphoma and has been struggling with that ever since, and is thankfully coming out of that now. It looks like everything is good, knock on wood. But so it was a trying time. So that's still on my plans. My hope. So we're doing like I mentioned earlier, we're currently developing a smaller scale kind of warband game, and then there's also a game that I have been working on and off that is going to come out later. That's a kind of a mass battle game in the kind of Blood and Plunder world to cover those big Buccaneer battles like I talked about earlier, right? Where you got thousands of guys and stuff like that, where it's more of a multi-base kind of unit. So with that, we're going to kind of run the gamut. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of putting all those pieces together to make sure they all work together, and then I'm going to revisit that and kind of go back to where I started with it and take it. So it is in our plans, but currently there's nothing official for that, although there are people doing it, especially with Oak and Iron and Blood and Plunder. And there's aspects in Oak and Iron design specifically to work with that and to simulate that. So
cool.
The connection points are there. It's not hard to connect the dots, but we haven't officially released that aspect of it yet. But yeah, that's the plan.
Awesome.
That's awesome. I was just curious. Whenever I see multiple games in the same system, I'm always like, I wonder if there's a way.
Yeah. Oh, of course. I mean, the second we started designing Oak and Iron, that was already on our minds. So that was like from the very beginning. It's like there's several ways I had this whole thing that we were working on where we were going to tie it in where you could actually kind of do a hybrid game at the same time too, where like the boarding action gets zoomed into like a Blood and Plunder game. And I got fixated on that, and then that's where I kind of stopped with everything when everything kind of fell apart. But that was really cool. I think it was probably unnecessary, honestly, because I think that's not probably what people wanted. So that part of it is kind of getting shelved for the moment as we move towards more of what you're talking about, where all the games are kind of interconnected.
Cool. That's awesome. With the when you talk about the larger scale games, larger model count games, it brings me to the point. Originally, you guys launched with metal miniatures for across your range, but more recently, you've been switching things over to plastic miniatures. So, although the models I was showing earlier, so this is plastic. These are plastic character pirates. How many plastic sets do you have in the range now?
So right now we have 5 different unit boxes. We have the box with the legendary characters you have there, and then we have a plastic ship.
Right.
And that's the range of plastics. So the plastics we do right now, we have a sailor's crew, which is pirates, different various sailors and different things. That one is really customizable. Tons of different weapon choices: pistols, cutlasses, axes, grenades, blunderbusses, boarding pikes, all kinds of stuff like that. Right. And then we've got a soldier box, which is the uniformed kind of infantry of the main colonial powers, and that you can run them 17th century style or 18th century style with the matchlocks or the firelocks and the tricorns or the floppy folded hats. We've got a Native American sprue for the Caribbean natives, and that lets you pretty much build out that whole faction of that sprue because there's so many different bits and options that you can build in there. And that one also lets you run maroons as well, because there's African head options that you can run, or black Caribs, which are kind of just like they're kind of integrated into the Carib culture. Then we have the militia sprue, which is basically just civilians with muskets, essentially. That one also has a bunch of African head options for the different black militias that especially Spain had, and a few others. Again, also works to build your maroons. And then there's a cavalry, which is again just kind of militia or uniformed cavalry, can kind of work for either. And then there is the Legends of the Pirate Legends sprue, which has all the named characters and all the kind of famous pirates. And then of course we have our sloop, which is broken down into two different versions you could build. You could do a balandra, which is kind of just like a balandra is just sloop in Spanish.
Okay.
So, but that's just kind of like the more stock, basic merchant sloop. And then you have the Bermuda sloop, which is the more kind of sleek privateer. It's also used merchant stuff, but generally more favored by pirates and privateers and things like that.
Okay.
A little faster, a little more lightly built, so it's got different traits to it. But that's our plastic range for now.
And
As far as hard plastics go.
yeah, and that plastic, they're all hard plastics. They're all so the high impact polystyrene on the sprue.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool, nice and easy to put together, which has been great. Lovely.
Cool.
No, that's awesome. So you could do. It becomes much easier to do those larger battles, those larger things, or to put together larger collections, I guess, as well, where you can.
Yeah.
Because you can have.
And
I guess you have 30 militia guys that you could use for Spanish or French or British forces, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And literally within days of that releasing, people were asking me, like, hey, are you guys going to plan on doing larger? I have a big collection now. We're going to do rules for larger battles. So I knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Gamers are going to be gamers, right? You always want to go bigger.
Yeah. Always want to have more, for sure. No, that's cool. The next photo that I've got here is kind of got a bit of a fisheye lens look. When I was looking through the photos that you sent through, it was like feels like it's a little bit of a possibly from a Beastie Boys clip, but I wanted to include it because it's one of those things that shows that like talks to a dynamic nature of the game, where you're moving around. Tell us a bit about the in the game itself, like what sort of objectives, what sort of things are you trying to achieve with your forces?
Yeah, so it's a very objective driven game, but it's also it's not like one of those games where it's just grab the objectives and win. There's the scoring system is like a reverse from what's normal. We have what's called strike points, right? Where you'll eventually strike your colors and surrender or just scram, right? So what it is as you take casualties, you will gain strike points. Also, if your opponent is controlling certain objectives or has accomplished certain things, you will also gain strike points. And if at any point you have 2 more strike points than your opponent at the end of the turn, then you've got to take a test with your commander to see if your force sticks around or if they get out of there. If your commander's dead, then you fail that roll automatically and you've lost. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of tactical play where you can't just focus on only one thing. You really got to kind of cover all your bases to make sure you're getting the score you need. But there's all kinds of different scenarios. We have, of course, raiding scenarios and plundering scenarios, and there's breakthroughs and there's domination type scenarios where you're trying to control the field, king of the hill, all the typical stuff, but it all integrates into the setting and the flavor. And we also have quite a few historical scenarios where you're just kind of refighting some of the smaller known battles or scaled down versions of maybe more popular ones and things like that, where it's typically you're trying to catch another ship, one ship's trying to escape, one ship's trying to capture the other, or you're trying to capture a certain or escort somebody important, right? So maybe a governor, a priest, whatever. I think we have 5 in the original. And what's interesting is every scenario of the main scenarios, there's 3 versions of every scenario. So even though there's 5, each book we releases typically has 5 scenarios in it, but there's 15 different ways to play it because or 15 total different ways because each scenario has a land version, a sea version, and an amphibious version. And then each one will play differently based on what you bring to the table, which is kind of nice if you show up for a casual game, right? So let's say you've got a ship, you've filled it up with crew, you're ready for that kind of game, that's what you're looking to play. But I show up and I've just got some a bunch of cavalry running around or something, right? We can just we could just roll our scenario like normal and just play the amphibious version. And now my cavalry centered force will be ashore, and you're going to have some kind of objective ashore that you've got to get to, and you've got to land your crew, do whatever it is you got to do, and sometimes get out, or sometimes the other way around. Sometimes you're trying to escape and get to your ship, and your ship's giving you cover fire and that kind of thing. So, a lot of dynamics, different scenarios that you can play.
Okay, that's awesome. I think there aren't a lot of games that I know of that have that that flexibility within the setting. I guess perhaps those sort of things would be presented as additional scenarios. So, hey, we've got 20 scenarios. Actually, you have 5 scenarios, but it's repeated. So, I guess
Exactly,
this saves you that repeating the objective, but just trying to achieve it in a different way.
And that was a big goal for us when we were designing it and getting it out. We wanted to make sure that it really was nothing was an afterthought, right? Like the land rules, the sea rules, that it's all totally integrated and it's all the game. There's no like this version, this part of it. It's all just the game, and it all is totally cohesive. And it doesn't matter what you've got, you can play it with anybody else who's also playing the same game. So there's no like, oh well, we can't play because you have this force and I have that force. It just doesn't work, right? There's always a way to play within the system.
Cool. That's good. Excellent. Next up, photo-wise, I've got a bunch of different units, so I'm going to have to describe them to you. What I've done is I've put them in. They're in alphabetical order, so I'm guessing that I think that the first unit here is the Buccaneers.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got.
So are they they got like the baseball cap looking hats, kind of. Pointy shoes.
Yep.
They should be like a bright orange, right? A bright orange and then another orange with like a feather and a knife in their teeth.
Right, exactly. Buccaneers, so that's one of my favorite units because they're just so cool and weird. Those are kind of like the original Caribbean pirates. So the history of those guys is that if you've done any reading about like piracy in the New World, it kind of always they're the start point of the story. So these are just like basically a bunch of bums hanging out on a Spanish island in the New World, and they dress in mostly like, work clothes, animal
Culottes,
skins.
bathrobes.
Those pointy shoes that they're wearing are actually hog hocks that they've just kind of sewn over their feet. So they're just like literally just like pigskins on their feet that they're rolling around in. And then when they just get nasty and disgusting, they cut them off and they put new ones on. They sew them back up and they just leave them on until they're too gross and they got to cut them off again. So, but these guys are running around Hispaniola and they're hunting cattle and they're hunting pigs, wild pigs.
Yep.
And then they're using the Taino bucan, what they call the bucan, which is where they get their name, which is basically like an early smoke. Like a smoker thing, they would make these racks. The rack itself is called the bucan. It's basically a wood grill. And they'd smoke these meats and they would preserve them. The bucaning process would make them last a long time. So they were valuable to ships passing through. Of course, they were French and they're mostly French, also English and Dutch a little bit, especially French Huguenots and people like that. And they were, the Spanish weren't super thrilled about them hanging out on their island. So they would constantly be hunting them down, which made them have a lot of animosity towards the Spanish. And eventually, one thing leads to another, and they just start attacking Spanish shipping from shore out of canoes and things like that. And which is an interesting theme of pirates overall that a lot of people don't know about. Is the most common pirate vessel of all time in the Caribbean is probably the canoe.
Oh wow!
There's so many stories of pirates and canoes just like capturing gigantic ships, and it's pretty impressive. Those guys had some fortitude to do that. But anyway, so they start attacking Spanish shipping, and the term buccaneer comes from probably the bucanier, which are these guys who were just running around in the woods, and they got to be so numerous that they made a musket. The type of musket they used was specific to them. And it was called a fusil boucanier, which is a buccaneer gun, essentially.
Right.
And what it was just a muzzle, smooth bore, flintlock musket that was ridiculously long. It was like 6 feet long overall.
Right.
The barrel alone was like 5 feet, I think. And it was known for its long range accuracy, as accurate as a smooth bore musket could be. Anyway, and they were renowned for their marksmanship.
Cool.
So they became very prized among buccaneer crews as sharpshooters and as hunters as well, for gathering provisions and stuff as they were, out on these long expeditions and things. So they're like the snipers in the game. They are really, really good shots. They're woodsmen, so they're really good at using cover. So they're very hard to actually shoot back at because they know how to use cover. They fight from cover effectively. They can load their muskets fast. They have this technique to load their muskets where they just kind of slam the musket into the ground to set the ball and powder instead of using the ramrod. So they can supposedly get like 6 shots a minute.
Okay.
And really outshoot the Spanish, who could, they had. The Spanish had terrible weapons typically in this period. They were very poorly equipped. The Spanish crowds absolutely refused. They had very strict gun laws, which is not a great thing for a frontier kind of society.
Yep.
Where you have pirates constantly raiding and attacking you. So all the guns were controlled typically by the crown's forces. So they had this kind of old antiquated arquebuses, while these guys are running around with the latest state-of-the-art flintlocks, super long, accurate muskets. And they have all these crazy techniques, and really, they're using high-quality gunpowder as opposed to the crappy Spanish gunpowder. So they're just totally outclassing them as far as technology and weapon.
Yeah.
So,
excellent.
And that's what those guys are kind of known for.
That's cool. Just quickly onto the chat. Walkabout Games says, Mike, any plan to put No Peace Beyond the Line back in print?
Yes, it's going to get a revised edition, and I'm hoping we'll have it by January, along with Blood and Crowns. It's coming out of the same printer. So.
Cool.
We right now, presently, if you want No Peace Beyond the Line, we have it available in the print-on-demand form on Wargame Vault. So if you really want it right now, you can go and grab it there. The PDF is obviously available as well. But yeah, we're going to revise a few little things here and there. It's going to just we're basically just going to add some options to things based on some of the newer plastics and some of the newer things that came out in the newer book. We're just kind of roll it into the existing book.
Excellent.
Scott wanted to know if there's any plans to lean into the more fantasy style version of Pirates. I worry this question may be taken as borderline blasphemy, but I'm going to risk it.
Absolutely not, Scott. How dare you? No. Yeah, so, yes, like I mentioned, the Warband game that we're working on right now, it's us sort of dipping our toe in that because it is based on a historical setting. It's based on, the game's going to be called Port Royal, and it's based on, in 1692, an earthquake and tsunami completely destroys Jamaica, and especially Port Royal. A third of the city sinks into the sea, and it's essentially it's funny because I recently played Mordheim for the first time, and got the book and was reading through the whole thing to see what all this, because I had heard about it, I never played it. I'm one of the few war gamers that was never really a GW guy. The only GW game I really got into was the Lord of the Rings game and their historical stuff. But my gateway drug was BattleTech into this, and that was like my game forever until not that long ago. I guess it was a long time ago now, like 10 years ago. But anyway, so I got it, and it struck me how similar the story of Port Royal is to Mordheim.
Okay.
It's kind of this debauched, wicked city. Like it's like a pirate's haven. There's like more. I think there's more. There are more bars than people in this place, right? Okay. And brothels.
Wow.
So, and it's just this crazy thing, and all these priests and ministers are going there, and they're trying to preach to the population. They're like, these people are hopeless. God is going to destroy this place. Sure enough, it happens. Right? Like, it comes and it's totally destroyed. So it's just, but that's kind of the theme of the game. Is it's kind of just like a historical Mordheim. But anyway,
Yep.
plus we are taking some liberties in that to make it just kind of more interesting from a gaming perspective, where we're bringing in all the factions, like the Spanish and the English and the French and the Native Americans, and we're injecting them into that where they probably weren't really there. I mean, they could have been, who knows? But from there, we're going to use that same system, and we do plan on doing. There's a whole theme and a whole game that's going to be planned around that will be out eventually.
Right.
They'll
have a bit more of that sort of fantastical element to it.
Next year, almost for sure next year, we'll be releasing another game called Blood and Sorcery, which I know we're going to talk about the blood end games thing later, so we can kind of interject that into that, because that's part of that range.
Yep, cool. Excellent. Cool. Josh says beef jerky, so talking about the the buccaneers.
Yes.
Next up, I've got a picture of, I think these are the filibusters.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce? Am I pronouncing that correctly, or?
In English, yeah, I'm pretty sure filibuster is correct. In French, it's like flibustier or something like that.
Okay.
I don't speak French, so got your Spanish and English names covered all day. French, not so much.
Right.
Definitely not Dutch.
But these guys look quite fancy. What's the story behind them?
I mean, they're French after all. So these guys are kind of like the
almost
civilized.
look like musketeers, except they're using long rifles. But
Well, musketeers would typically carry muskets.
Muskets.
For some reason, in all the popular literature, they're just swordsmen. But I mean, the name musketeer kind of gives it away. But
it's weird. It's almost like that name came from something.
But the flibustiers are they kind of come from the buccaneers, sort of. They're basically French adventurers, sailors, but they learn, obviously, they also originate mostly from Tortuga, which is off the coast of Hispaniola, Petit Guave later on. Those are like this big, that's kind of what will eventually become Haiti, that whole part of Hispaniola. And they are your kind of rank and file French buccaneers, essentially. They are known for always just they're again known for marksmanship, not probably at the same level necessarily as the buccaneers, but they're more aggressive French. They preferred the whole French buccaneer style. It was not uncommon for French buccaneer ships to carry no cannon at all. They would say that 10 muskets is better than one cannon, and so they would always basically suppress. Their whole thing was just if you can't open your gun ports because we're pouring so much musket fire into your gun ports, your guns are useless. And that was kind of their emphasis. So they were very aggressive in the way they would capture enemy ships, in that they would just basically heat up their decks with musket fire, and then they would board. So they would always carry at least 2 pistols, so that they could go in there and board aggressively and just shoot at people. Pirates were not. Despite popular lore, most pirates, the vast majority, were not great swordsmen. They would rely heavily on firearms, pistols especially. So they're just running in there, or later on pistols anyway. But so musketry at first, you get in, board your ship, and just start shooting pistols at you until you just give in. So that's kind of their thing. They're very aggressive.
I want to know if the guy on the far left is based on Daniel Day-Lewis's character in Last of the Mohicans, because he kind of looks like him.
Absolutely, he is. Yes. I know exactly what you're talking about. Totally. Yes.
Awesome.
Scott, remember, when you use him, you have to yell, "I will find you," each time. Like,
Excellent. On to the next photo. I have the Lanceros. Lanceros?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So lanceros just means lancer in Spanish, and that's the lanceros are interesting because as that term is typically reserved for cavalry, right? Lancer, you think cavalry unit, but these guys were hunters, is what they were. They were typically lower class people in Spanish cultures. Many were mulatto or African descent, but they were typically freedmen. In the Spanish slave system, you could never be a slave for life. At least you're not supposed to be. Eventually, you would earn your freedom, and then, so there was a lot of free blacks and mulattoes, and there was a lot of intermixing in the Spanish society. So a lot of these guys were, since not everybody could have firearms, they would hunt with lances, which is a very old way of hunting. So they became adept at basically guerrilla fighting with spears, is what they did. When the Penn and Venables expedition, which is, if you're to go into a little bit of the history there, Oliver Cromwell decided he's going to conquer Hispaniola as some grand design of his, and he sends an army under these two, a general and an admiral, Penn and Venables, and they attack this place. And as they're marching into to the city they're trying to attack, these lanceros come out and are just like appearing out of the jungles, slaughtering a bunch of their troops and fading away and disappearing. So they're guerrilla fighters essentially, but melee focused ones. So in the game, they're skirmishers, so they'll jump in, they'll hit you, and they'll go back to where they were, so they can disengage freely from those melees where after they attack you. They're really hard to pin down and shoot. They can move quickly, so they're really fun troops, and they're really powerful. They're some of the most powerful non-shooting units in the game that are not on horseback.
Cool. Just checking here, I thought these ones were, this picture that I have it was of the plastic models, but Camo Specs has said no, these are the metal sculpts.
Oh yeah, those are metal. So all of our plastics,
yep.
Again, because we're not a huge company, so we have making plastic models is very expensive. The tools and everything is it's a big investment. So all of the plastic sets that we've done are all kind of more or less generic. You can use those models as a lot of different things, right? So for example, for our sailor box, right? Our sailor box you can use to build a ton of different units. So each nationality has a few sailor options, usually different sailor unit types based on experience or different things, and they'll build any of those from any nation. And there's different head options and weapons that you can kind of reflect certain nations more than others if you want to get it, just to make it look a little more correct. And then you could also build different buccaneer units, some militias, different things out of what's in those sprues. All of our others are plastics and what's now getting kind of converted into the thermocast plastic stuff.
Okay.
Or the metals, sorry, the metals and what's getting converted into those thermocast plastics is those are more specific generally. Right. There are a few more generic models, but lanceros, for example, is a very specific thing. You could build lanceros out of the sailor sprues, and it works. You could build each box, like you build 6 guys with lances, so that's an option in there. So you could build any of these units out of the plastics. It's flexible. But if you want just a specific thing that we've sculpted as lanceros, that's what that unit would be. Right? And same thing with the filibusters and the buccaneers, right? Some of those more specific units that, it's making a plastic set for those would be, it's a big investment for a very specific unit that is it's not totally justified for us right now as much as I'd love to do it.
Yeah.
So a lot of those more specific niche units will be kind of just, and you could build, and again, any of these things out of the plastics if you wanted to, but
cool.
The options are all there. So,
okay.
But these are specific, and that's what those sculpts are. All the ones that are in the sets of 4 like that are going to be those types.
Okay then. Cool. Thanks for that, clarifying that. I think now we're ready to jump into a quick chat about the Blood and series of games. So you've taken the mechanics, the structure of Blood and Plunder, and then transported it to other time periods. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah. So presently we've got Blood and Valor was the first, and that's a First World War game. It's quite a big jump from
Sure.
17th and 18th century piracy and colonial battles. But we've got that one. Then we have less of a jump, which is the Blood and Steel, which is a game that kind of covers a wide gamut of Victorian era stuff, like the American Civil War, Seminole Wars, the Zulu Wars, things like that. Right? So all kinds of the Spanish American War is like one of the later ones. So it covers a bunch of that stuff. Currently on Kickstarter right now, we have Blood and Crowns, which is covers primarily the 100 Years' War, also covers some other stuff around the same time period, like the Castilian Civil War, Scottish, the Scottish rebellions and all that stuff. So that's on Kickstarter right now, and that is a medieval game. So those games all work off of the same core system of Blood and Plunder, and primarily that the system of that is the stat line of the unit, where you've got your fight skills, your shoot skills, your resolve, some special rules, and then it all operates on the alternating initiative bidding mechanic, although not always driven by cards, sometimes driven by different things. So like Blood and Valor uses a dial where your units build up a number of points, and then you bid from that pile of points that you have against your opponent, and higher bid will go first. And since the First World War is a much different conflict than what Blood and Thunder covers, that kind of represents the more standardized training that that everybody would have in the First World War, right? Like kind of a soldier with a rifle is a soldier with a rifle. There's not a lot of difference in the way they would do things then. So that's kind of made to kind of reflect that. So we don't have, like in Blood and Plunder, every model's got an experience level. They're either veteran, trained, or inexperienced. Not really factor in the First World War game, right? So that's not in there. And the same thing for Blood and Steel, where Blood and Steel is you're rolling a pool of d10s, and you're displaying them before your opponent, and you're going to choose one of those dice. And your opponent kind of knows what you can pull from, but not necessarily which die. So it's the same kind of bidding mechanic, but just expressed in a different way. And in Blood and Steel, they because they're covering so many different conflicts, they wanted to keep the stats a little more streamlined so that it's more flexible over a series of conflicts that have a lot of similarity in the way they fought, but they're not exactly the same. And then Blood and Crowns is probably the closest to Blood and Plunder. It still uses the card deck, inexperienced, trained veteran stuff is all in there. But it's more melee-centered and focused. So a lot of the fighting happens towards the same time. Armor and the difference in weapons is more significant. As a longbow compared to a spear or whatever is going to be totally different in how it hits and affects your armor and stuff like that. So
right.
That's just a general overview.
Scott wanted to know how surreal was it to have Blood and Plunder featured on South Park?
Yeah, that was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to have that, and it's cool. Those guys actually really like the game, and we got to hang out with them at Gen Con. They've come to visit us at our place down here in Miami, and they gave us bicycles when they came. That was nice of them.
They gave you bicycles?
There's a story there I can tell you.
Okay, all right.
So, if you want to tell that story later, we can, or I can do it now. It's up to you. But yeah, so that was a lot of fun.
Excellent.
So did they reach out to you before they did it, like to ask, or did they just do it and then they talk to you afterwards, or?
So no. So what happened at first was they reached out to us. They discovered the game. They reached out to us and said, "Hey, this looks really great. We want to get into this. Set us up. Tell us what we need, whatever." So we started a dialogue with them. They got a ton of stuff, and then they started playing. They were playing for quite a bit. Then we met up with them at Gen Con one year. We played with them some there, and they drew characters of all of us, which was really cool. And they sent those to us after that. And it was after that, I believe it was the season immediately following that they put it in the show. We had no warning. It just kind of came up and we found out. So that was a cool surprise.
Yeah,
that's pretty neat.
That is awesome.
They seem like really good dudes. A friend of mine, my wife has an aunt out there, and we have some friends out there, and they're all super psyched now. I guess they just spent a ton of their own money, like basically refurbishing some crazy restaurant thing out there. It's like
yes.
Casa Bonita.
Yeah. It was a legit place that they went to when they were kids, and hearing them describe it, they were like, when we were little, it was like the coolest place to go. But as you got older, you're like, oh, it's actually like not really well put together, and everything's falling apart, and it's not really run well, and there's no money. So they were gonna. So I guess Matt and Trey swooped in and bought it, and like has spent all this money like bringing it back and like turning it into like a real place and trying to update everything. And my wife's a big foodie, and I guess the woman who they hired to be their new executive chef is apparently like a great cook. So they're gonna have like really good food, and it's her take on everything. And so like they seem like really good dudes that they're like, oh yeah, like we're just gonna spend all this money on things that we like. And I was like, that's awesome, good for you guys. So
yeah, they're awesome. They're great guys.
John Schaefer actually used to go to Casa Bonita as a kid as well. Yeah.
I'll have to ask John about that when I see him.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely good. So during some of this chat, I've been putting up some photos from Blood and Crowns. One thing I wanted to ask about, so for Blood and Plunder, I don't have any pictures up on the screen at the moment, so it's just us chatting. But for Blood and Plunder, there's a huge range of miniatures. Firelock Games makes a huge range of miniatures. For Blood and Valor, Firelock doesn't make miniatures for that, right?
Correct.
But
as a general rule, we don't make any miniatures for any of the Blood and Games things outside of Blood Plunder and Oak and Iron are the only two games we make models for presently.
Okay.
The reason for that is because we initially did not set out to make models. But in designing Blood and Plunder, in starting to work on it and trying to buy models, there really was no option. It's an obscure bit of history, even though Pirates is well known, and there's lots of pirate miniatures out there. There are no like actual historical pirate miniatures out there, right? At least not for the Buccaneer period, especially. There's just so many details and so many things as we learned, and we just realized that we should just. When we did our first Kickstarter, we just said, well, let's learn how to make models and just do a range of models. So at that point, we shrunk the game kind of down because originally the full scope of what was in our second Kickstarter was going to be in the first game.
Okay.
But we said, if we're going to make models, let's just scope it. So originally in the Kickstarter, the game was going to be English and Spanish. And then from the English, you could pull your pirate factions or your militia factions. And the Spanish had their guardacostas, which are kind of like their guardacosta means coast guards.
Right.
They're pirates, 100%. They're privateers. But they're supposed to be guarding the coast, but they're just robbing everybody.
A lot of outsourcing during this historical period.
Yeah, exactly. So, so that was going to be those two. So we just did those two, but then it did a lot better than we expected. And we were like, we need to come up with some stretch goals. So we added the French, we added the Brethren of the Coast. It's kind of a mix of French and English. And then we started with those.
Yep.
And then from there we expanded, and the next we brought in the Dutch and the natives and all kinds of stuff. So as well as some generic models to fill in some of the other gaps for like things like the Scots and the Portuguese and things like that. We just saw a need. There was no models that existed. Kind of the same thing with Oak and Iron.
Yep.
With Oak and Iron, you kind of needed models because of the nature of the type of game it is. We couldn't sell that as just like a rule set. It had to have models with it. But really, there's nobody who makes. There's one company that makes the 17th century models that I'm aware of, and it's Langton.
Okay.
And which they make very nice models, but they're very difficult to get in the United States.
Yeah.
And they're small. I wanted to do slightly bigger than what they did. So we did 1/600 as opposed to the typical 1/1200 for naval games. I can't paint stuff that small. It just kills me. But 1/600 is good. It's a good compromise, especially because we're not sticklers about scale or anything like that. It's just kind of, just in Oak and Iron especially, the ship, it's kind of more, scale's kind of just abstracted. So the size of the ship doesn't really matter. It's just big enough to have some good detail and easy to paint, but small enough to fit in a small space. So Oak and Iron plays on average 3x3, 3x4. You can play bigger if you want to play huge games, but your average game is going to play on a small space. Yeah. So, so the new games that we're doing, a lot of these games, like 100 Years War. I mean, there's tons of great model options for almost everything. I mean, World War I, there's a ton. I mean, there's everything is pretty much covering. Same thing with, Zulu War, Civil War. You could. go just walk into like a Historicon and try to throw a rock and not hit a Civil War model somewhere. You know? So
Right.
it's there's no reason for us to get into a crowded market. Our sculpting bandwidth is super tight. You know, we can barely keep up with what we're already trying to do for the games we're covering. But really, our main thing is rules, and we want to make games, we want to publish games, and we want to do that. So we will continue to support Blood and Plunder and Oak and Iron with new models for a long time, and maybe in the future. So in Blood and Crowns, we are looking into doing sculpts that we will make available as STLs as 3D printable options. So there's a handful of characters and things. Just kind of have some extra stuff since we did this one as a Kickstarter. This is kind of an experiment for us.
Okay.
We've never, because, you know, doing our last Kickstarter, Raise the Black, which we did in 2020. Not great timing for that kind of thing. So that was it was such a massive beast of a project. It was really just too much.
2020, 0 stars. Would not recommend.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, 0 out of 10.
Would not do again.
No, not doing that again. So, but I mean, it just took up so much resources and so much time, and then all the issues with shipping, and we had factories in China that were just shut down for like a month at a time, and it was just crazy.
That whole scenario, that whole time frame was a nightmare for everybody. And every
100%.
small company that I know, even like the bigger companies that like, it was just like, oh, so normally we pay X amount for a container, and you're like, cool, and they're like, but now there's 20% less boats. There's like half as many people working at any of the actual shipping ports, whether it's outgoing or incoming, and the price of the containers has like quadrupled.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like if I'm a small company and it's like, well, I'm going to spend $6,000 for everything I need for the next 6 months. And they're like, right, but now instead of getting it in 2 months, you're going to get it in 6 months. And instead of it being $3,000, it's going to be 18 grand. You're like, my whole business model's upside down. How am I supposed to do that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I am super gun shy. I basically swore Kickstarters off forever after that. I was like, this is just crazy. I mean, it was that project was that project was just terrible because of that. I mean, what came out of it was great. We have such a beautiful line of stuff that came out of that. I'm super happy with the plastics, the starter box. If you've seen it, it's this massive, beautiful thing, and you get so much stuff in there. And I'm really happy with how everything turned out. But getting it out, getting it to people was just, I mean, just a never-ending nightmare.
Yep.
And I said, I'm never doing this again.
Yep.
I mean, who knows what could happen next? I'm never going to do anything that's going to take me 2 years to do ever. Like, it's not. I mean, it was supposed to turn around in like a year and a half, probably was realistic guess. But I mean, it was just a mess. So what we said is like, you know, I saw I backed a game. I backed a game recently called Hobgoblin that looked pretty cool, and I was looking at the Kickstarter and I was like, man, this is really such a nice, simple Kickstarter. And we publish books all the time, and there's just something about Kickstarter that just makes it more exciting to put things out and gets people more interested, and just puts it in front of people that wouldn't normally see it. So I said, you know, I looked at that and I said we could do something similar to this, because Blood and Crowns was going to come out. We were going to just print it and publish it and the whole thing, but we said let's take this angle and try something a little different. Yep. So we tried some new stuff. We've wanted to get into kind of the STL game now for a while, and so we're throwing a few models in there to try it out. So that's kind of the story of how that came out. It's a very different project for us. It's stuff we know how to do. It's stuff that we know we can turn around quickly, and we know it's not going to take a year. You know, it's an easy project to run for us. Yeah. We have all the tools and everything in place, and even if things go south, it won't go south by hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
You know, so it's fixable if things go south.
I think Kickstarter is a great tool for, I think, either new companies, small companies, or even like medium companies that are kind of like doing something different. It's a cool way to go, hey, like, am I the only one that thinks this is a good idea? And then the community is like, oh, I like that. And you're like, oh, I guess it is worth me doing this. We've covered this before. One of my biggest gripes is when like a big company uses it, and I'm like, what are you guys doing over there that you like? I don't want to mention anybody because we have some friends in some of these companies, but there are certain companies that tend to go back to the well like once or twice a year, and I'm always like, what sort of operation are you running over there that you don't have the bandwidth or the business acumen to manage your books and do a new project without showing up at my doorstep being like, can I have $50? It's, you know what I mean? It's like,
let's start with 50
get
and
it,
let's balloon it to 280. But anyway, keep going.
Sure, right, because I'm gonna go all in. I need all the expansions. So
I get it. There's just something about, like, for us, it's worked out really well in this regard for this Kickstarter because it's doing much better than we projected, which is always great. It seems to always happen to us, thankfully.
Yep.
But it's now because, see, I would have ordered a lot less books.
Right.
I would have ordered initially than now that I'm going to order, which is great because it gets the price down. That means I don't have to raise prices if things get weird, and it's it gives me a lot more flexibility. So for us, for a small company like us, it's excellent. But really, just even for the bigger companies, like I get it because it's just something about Kickstarter. It's just got that thing that if I did a pre-order and I put the same book out, I might have initially done half as much, just because it just lacks that thing that Kickstarter does. I get it. I get it because there's a community there. There's a whole culture around it. There's a whole thing. But I get why they do it
now too, because you've got Kickstarter, you've got crowdfunder, you've got GameFound. There's like, and there's two other ones.
BackerKit's doing their own now as well. Yeah, everybody's trying to get in on it for sure. The Indiegogo, there's a bunch.
Yep.
But something about it just brings people in. So. Okay. It's ultimately, I think it's kind of good for everybody. I know what you mean about some of the larger companies. It's the bad thing about them doing it, which, I get it, I understand it. The bad thing about them is for people like us, it takes away from our smaller Kickstarters, where if somebody, like, whenever we're going to launch a project, we're like looking to see who else is going to launch a project at the same time. Because, like, I don't want to compete with that Kickstarter.
And we all do it. Like when we launched ours. You always have to be careful because it's like you don't want to like crush the community, right? The community wants to be able to go, oh, I backed this back in July, but yours is in October. I'm going to do that. But it always kind of makes me chuckle too because like you'll see companies like Games Workshop is never going to use Kickstarter. Like they're like they're a real company. They don't need crowdfunding. They're like, we're going to make this new thing and everyone will buy it. And you're like, yeah, they will. And then it's like, Wizards of the Coast isn't using Kickstarter. Like, they don't need to do that. So I think there needs to be some guidelines in place. I think if your company is bigger than a certain size, you should just not be allowed to use Kickstarter.
Right.
Like there should just be guidelines in place where they're like, yeah, it's not really for that. You know what I mean? Like it's like GM was like, hey, we want to make a new Mustang next year. If you guys want it, let's back it on Kickstarter. You'd be like, get out of here! Like I'm not paying for that.
Yeah. Well, I think Tesla did something like that. Didn't they think like
the Tesla truck,
like $100 or something from everybody or something, some weird thing like that. Yeah.
Okay, Scott says, Scott in the chat says, what I like most about Civil War gaming enthusiasts is how open they are to me painting my minis in alternate color schemes and mixing up uniform styles amongst my troops.
Right, they love that.
They're super okay with it.
Yeah, they love that.
Absolutely.
We've done it before at mini wargaming conventions. Dudes will come up to you and they'll go, hey, are those supposed to be 7th Regiment Zouaves? And you're like, yeah. And they're like, well, it looks like you painted them more of like a cerulean blue. Yeah, it really should be Prussian blue. And you're like,
yeah.
Walkabout Games says the new stuff was so worth waiting for. The Kickstarter was the best gift my wife has bought me. So.
Oh, that's nice.
That's awesome. Nice. Happy to hear that.
That's a good wife. That's a good wife right there.
Excellent.
It is encouraging to hear all the great feedback once people actually got it. That it's that it's. People have. Our community has grown a lot since that. Having a 2-player starter set in plastic goes a long way in making the game accessible for more gamers to come in and play. So it's cool.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so I think we'll wrap up our focus conversation here on Blood and Plunder and the Blood and of course Blood and Crowns. In the notes below, there's a link to the both the Firelock Games website and the Kickstarter, the Blood and Crowns Kickstarter, so you can go and check that out.
And the Army Painter.
And the Army Painter.
Yeah.
It's there. Our sponsor. Yes, sponsor. Go and check them out. Take a look. But yeah, I think you've got 9-10 days left on the Blood and Crowns.
9 days, yeah.
9 days left.
I believe it's 9 days.
Excellent.
Right now, yeah.
Cool.
So we're coming toward the finish line. One stretch goal left
Excellent.
to get unlocked.
So definitely go and check that out, particularly if you are into your medieval wargaming. So now we're going to jump in and we're going to take a look at the minis from the Facebook group. We'll have a quick run through these.
What do we got?
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I know Mike doesn't have...
I've probably
can't see
seen them all
for
anyway,
these, but yeah, hopefully have. First up, we have...
One thing.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. No, I'll jump in later. Go ahead.
First up from Bing Lee, we have a demon model from Malifaux. I can't remember. I read the caption, but I can't remember what they're called. Scott will be able to let us know. But yeah, Bing continues to paint up cool Malifaux models. He actually won a tournament, Malifaux tournament recently, which is super cool.
He came in 1 of 1.
No, Jake. There's more than one people.
Still counts as a win.
Yeah.
Right, one of 2.
You gotta show up, right? Gotta be in it to win it.
That's right.
Next up from Chris Gorka, we have the Burning Skull, Burning Head Eternal Spell from Warhammer. So it's a fantastic flaming skull.
Yeah, this came out. This is great. It's super bright.
Yeah.
He did a. Chris always does like crazy colors, and then like does a couple of random like. Sorry, he does.
Very desaturated.
Dave described it better.
Very desaturated colors with an occasional, like, with a pop of a very saturated color.
Yeah.
And this one's kind of the opposite. It's very saturated yellows and oranges in there. So, but yeah, definitely cool looking model there, Chris. Well done.
That thing was rad.
Next up, so Chris Jones, a friend from British Columbia, has taken a little bit of a break from painting his Dark Angels and is painting up an orc fighter for a charity project. So in this particular shot, I've got sort of sandwiched 2 of his photos together, but he's using some chipping fluid there to create some obvious wear and tear on the underside of that fighter bomber. It's looking very cool. I think he it started off, it was kind of a random collection of yellows and other bits and pieces, but now he's going with that pale blue white underbelly and a darker green top, kind of like the whenever I see that, I think Messerschmitt, sort of World War II German.
Oh yeah, it has like the German
camo.
The German like standard Luftwaffe camo.
Yep. But Chris, looking really good. Thanks for posting those pictures of the chipping fluid in action. People can definitely check those out. Next up, we've got Dan Osborne. Is painted up he's working on a Legio Furians force for Adeptus Titanicus. I think these will probably pull double duty in Legiones Imperialis later in the year.
Yep.
But yeah, very definitely looking cool. Another like, vibrant yellow paint job there.
Yeah, they look great.
Yeah, it's a great job. Next up is Fabrice.
He's got like the retro like 1950s flames all over them.
Oh yeah. That's the only way to do the Furians. You got to do those.
It looks like the pile's a little yellow off to the right. Those look like the masks that he used. Did he use like? It looks like he used stickers instead of like a template. So.
Right. I'm not sure. I suspect it might be stencils. There's quite a few companies that do flame stencils. But yeah, when you're doing that many
This
of
is,
them,
this is Fabrice's night house.
yep. I think this is House Crast, which is one of the Mechanicum households. But yeah, he's got a lot on the go at the same time. I think there are.
Yeah, he's got what? He's got 1,
6 big
2,
knights,
3,
little
4,
knights.
5. He's got 5 Knight Armigers, 1 Knight Helverin. And then he's got, it looks like a Lancer. And then he's got 2 Knights Crusader with the double heavy weapons. And then he's got 3 of the big guys in the back. I forget what those ones are called, but
Right. Yeah.
pretty good though. That's a decent assortment of knights right there.
Putting in lots of work. Definitely cool. Looking great for Reese. Very nice. Following that, we've got Jeff Smith. Jeff is painting up some. I think he's still working on a commission here with these Dark Angels. I'm sure he couldn't possibly, as a Space War player, he couldn't possibly be working on Dark Angels for himself. But they are looking beautiful. This is a Leviathan Terminator Captain.
Those Terminators are so much fun to paint. They're so chonky.
Excellent. I haven't painted any of the Terminators yet, but it'll be fun when we get to it. Then next up, we've got Kelly Rowe. Kelly has painted up Thor. I think you saw this one in the group, Jake. The fantastic glow.
Oh yeah, with the OSL.
Mjolnir glowing blue.
Hi, girls.
Looking.
Come up. Say hi.
Oh. There we go. Fantastic. Sorry, I just realized I need to go back to the full shot of all of us so that we can see Jake's puppy.
Oh, Bailey just wanted to sit with me.
Awesome. Next up from the group, we've got we've got 3 more shots here, I think. Yep. We've got Patrick Keith, so a sculpt dude from Bombshell Minis. Texas has been working on his 90s retro Eldar. So building up a combat patrol force with those. So coming along nicely. I think he's got hasn't got many more minis to paint for that, but looking really good, Patrick. Very cool. Lovely to see. Then we have...
It's the Swordwind.
The Stormwind?
The Swordwind.
Swordwind? The Bealtan Swordwind?
It's Bealtan.
Okay. Cool. Next up we've got from Stephen Ryder. We've got one of the halflings from, I think this was the old Grenadier D&D Halfling Adventurers box that Stephen showed off last week or the week before. But yeah, looking fantastic. I remember this model from when I was a wee lad from Australia playing D&D. Looking fantastic.
He's pretty great.
Excellent. Patrick's in the chat, says thanks, and then Biltan. But yeah, beautiful job there, Stephen. Looks excellent. And then the final shot that we've got from the group is from Jan. This is a model they painted 10 years or so ago. It's a Land Raider. And currently Jan is thinking about converting up a Legion of the Damned army. So this is one that he's worked on before.
That would be rad.
Initially, when I was looking at the picture, I thought that this had like little blobs of snow on top of it. But it turns out
little bones.
They are little bones. So yeah, it's the articulated skeleton of the Land Raider in action. But yeah, so look forward to seeing what you do with that yarn. I think it'll be quite cool.
He needs to like green stuff some flames on it.
Yeah.
Well, the Legion of the Damned, like their whole motif, they look like Death Company. They look like Blood Angel's Death Company. They're basically all black armor with like bones and like death motifs all over them. They're kind of piratey looking, and then but they usually have like ethereal flames on them, like they're either on fire or they like have flames on them. It's like one of the I think it's one of the reasons they look so cool. They look like a biker gang, or like the pro wrestlers, the Road Warriors, if they were Space Marines. Like they're crazy.
Actually, now that you mentioned the skulls, Mike, can you just stand up for a little bit so we get to see your?
Got our gold.
There you
go.
Mike's pirate shirt. Jake, you've got
Oh
your
yeah, it's about as close as I can get.
skulls and cross hockey sticks, and I just have the skull and the wings. I didn't
Good
have-
enough.
I probably should have. I probably do have a shirt with a slightly more piratey motif, but at least we all have the skulls going on. I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, I was trying to get. I was like skull and crossbones. I was like, do I have anything with skull and crossbones? I have like a Robotech T-shirt that has like the Skull Squadron logo, which is the Jolly Roger, but it's like on the cockpit of the Veritech, so you can't really see it. And I was like, I'm not gonna wear that. And I was like, this is the only thing I have that's like. I mean, it's in the right position. It's two hockey sticks, and it's Eddie from Iron Maiden who looks like a zombie or a skull. So
Yeah.
best I could do on short notice.
It works. It works. Absolutely.
Yep. Very definitely works there. Fantastic. So that brings us to the end of the photos from the group. Thank you very much, everybody. If you want to get your models featured on the show, make sure you're keeping us up to date with what you're doing hobby-wise in the Build, Paint, Play group. There is a link down below, and you can post there. Let us know. It'd be super cool.
For sure.
So, I was going to say, Mike, thanks very much for coming on tonight and talking about Blood and Plunder and getting us excited with your extensive knowledge of the period and the theater, I guess.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, guys. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate being here.
No, it's definitely
It was a good time.
Definitely super cool. As I pointed out before, the minis are super cool. They're great. I think, Mike, you said the ones you've been painting, you did the slap shop method. You did the Xenophil dry brush and threw on some speed paints.
Yep. That's basically what I did. Army Painter Speed Paint, so your sponsor. Shout out to your sponsor there.
Yeah, nice. There you go.
Yeah, they are. That's been my go-to lately. It's pretty nice and quick. I've never been a super great painter. I will not put anything unpainted on the table ever. So getting stuff painted fast is always high priority for me. And I'm kind of colorblind too, which doesn't help. So I just kind of use the whatever I feel is whatever the label says seems like the right color, and I just go with what I got.
Right.
But yeah, it's been all the plastics. I've been having fun putting all the plastics together, kit bashing all the different kits we have. It's been pretty cool.
One thing I'm going to do as well.
There's lots of-
is going to hold this up.
There's lots of really good. Oh yeah, the wood bases.
Yeah.
There's. It took me a minute. I was like, why are all the bases the same? I was like, oh right, because they're either on a dock or on a ship. Like that makes sense.
Yep, you can always fill it in, put some basing if you want. You don't want.
I think one of the nicest things about the models, the Firelock models, there's so much like, because most of them are wearing like clothes of the period, so there's lots of like folds and ruffles and wrinkles and whatever. So if you're using contrast paint, it's doing so much of the heavy lifting for you. Like,
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Exactly. But no, super
I always try to make sure we get sculpts that work around my inability to paint. So the more cheating I could do, the better.
Awesome. Fantastic. So I think that
Dave, do you want to give a prep what we're gonna do next week, and then we'll
okay.
we'll say our goodbyes and get out of here.
Next week we are going to talk about some stuff that I arrived last week for me is the Talking Miniatures books. So these are not books that I did. I didn't publish these. These are published by Robin Jews and John Stallard. Robin Jews, when I was at Games Workshop, Robin was the head of the studio. John Stallard was the head of the US business for a long time, but he was like global sales director as well. They both spent a lot of time working for Games Workshop, and so they put together this book where they interview like 18 other people that they worked with at GW. So we'll talk about talking miniatures next week. So I might contact Robin and get a few sort of juicy stories that aren't in the book. Or we'll just make some up, because it'll be fun. But, so yeah, that's what we'll do next week. I think the only other things to say are, hopefully if you're stuck this long, you'll hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button, hit the like button. Once the rerun is going, jump in, place a comment. We've got a few more things coming up in the next few weeks that we'll talk about soon. Some exciting stuff. But that brings us to the end of the show tonight. I think we're running an hour 50, so...
Thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you so much, Mike, for being here. We really appreciate it. Especially on, I mean, I know it's your favorite holiday. It's, National Talk Like a Pirate Day. Or sorry, it's International Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Yeah. You're only allowed to talk like a pirate, like, all day if you're in international waters.
You're right. You have to be in international waters.
Yes, you do.
But so, thank you so much for being here. It was super cool hanging out and talking to you and getting to learn more about the fantastic games you guys make. Like Dave said, make sure you guys mash all the bells and do all the things, and check out everybody's links down below. Again, another huge shout out to our sponsor at Army Painter. Thank you guys so much. And we will see you all next week. And as always, don't forget to build, paint, play.
That was actually pretty good.
Okay.
We did
Shut
that.
up and sit down. Shut up and sit down.